Welcome, folks. This is lesson 6 in our game design class. Uh, so today is the last uh, is our lecture before next week when we have to showcase our games in person. And then after that, we're going to have a little break without having to attend a lecture because we'll have the little mid-semester break. Okay, but next week is a very important week. I'm going to announce some stuff next week, and we're also going to have to play test our games next week. So don't miss next week for sure. That'll, of course, be on campus. Today, we're going to have more lecture. We're going to talk about game systems and the dynamics of those systems. We're going to talk about resources and trade and economies. And it's not only for games that have buying and selling gold or something like that. We're going to talk about this in a more abstract sense. If you remember, we talked about concrete and abstract resources. So this will apply to you no matter what kind of game you're making. It will apply. Okay? And then afterwards, with whatever time remains, I'm hoping we'll have maybe 20 or 30 minutes. We can do breakout rooms, and then if you'd like to talk to me, please do talk to me. Audio issues? I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know if there's any issue on my end. Let's see. Yeah, I think it should be okay. Okay. Yeah. So we will have ourselves some time for breakout rooms. Please do let me know though. Tell me if you would like to talk to me in breakout rooms, so that I can plan accordingly. Because if there's more people, then I would like to leave more time. But I'm generally not sure, so I'll leave maybe 20 minutes. But that might not be enough time if there's a bunch of people who want to talk to me, right? So let me know, please, if you can. That would help. We could talk about your assignment. We could do feedback, whatever it may need to be done. Okay. Um, Actually, before I go on, the assignment one, part one. Great job on it, folks. Really excellent work. Um, the grades are out, and you should be able to see that you did a really great job overall. So that's really great. For part two, you are generally expected that you're probably going to work with the same people, but you can swap members out and things like that if you need to. For part two as well, for going from part one to part two, you can add members, you can drop members, you can do whatever. You have to join again for part two anyway. All right. So you do need to join groups a second time. If you already joined your groups for part one, regardless of if you're going to stick with the same people, you still need to tell everyone to rejoin for part two, okay? Because it's a separate submission box. It's a separate group for a separate submission box. It's just how it works, okay? However, do feel free to add on an extra person for part two. Even if you're at a full team of four, I will give you special permissions if you tell me about it. If you ask me about it, I can make it happen so that you can actually have a team of five. Um, if you want to add somebody else to help you finish this assignment, okay? You need to ask me directly though. You're not going to be able to do it yourself. So just let me know. And it won't have an effect on your grade either. Not a negative one at least. Um, so that's also an option. So for example, if somebody missed part one, they could potentially join your group to help you conduct the playtest for part two. And I'm expecting a lot of the issue with part two is going to be you need to find people. You need to actually find people and talk to them and arrange playtest session and take notes. That is the process. That's what we're looking for. Um, I don't want your game to be perfect. I want you to actually listen to players. That's the important part. Um, that's that's good game design. Okay, you're gonna have to listen to players. So, some differences between part one and part two. Um, I don't. I'm not looking for you to design a new game for part two. if you didn't do part one and you want to start fresh for part two, you can design a new game for part two, but and then just really quickly test it with an audience. That's fine. Somebody says you can't hear me. Try rejoining. Yeah, try rejoining. Remember, they need to be outside the team. It can be other players, other students of this class. So you could just go to another team and say, "Hey, you're a team of 4 players. Why don't we swap games? Here, you playtest my game. We'll record you, and we'll playtest your game, and you record us. Easy, right? Business relationship, shake hands, done. Um, but what's important is that you don't bias them ahead of time as well, and you need to record the entire play session. Remember this, folks. You need to record the entire play session. It doesn't need to be long. It could be 20 minutes, right? Your games are supposed to be, in theory, they're supposed to be playable in 10 minutes. In practice, that might not happen. In practice, it might take 20 minutes. Um, but you need to record the thing because that's part of what you have to submit. You will get really great grades if you submit everything, even if your game is bad. If you submit everything, you'll get great grades because it's not about having. It's not necessarily about just coming up with a great game idea from the start, because it can be kind of random whether or not your game is fun. It can be kind of random. You just kind of have to find out. The point is if you've done a good process to be able to find out correctly if your game is good or not. Does it matter if the recording has awful audio? No, no, it's okay. If you can hear kind of roughly what kind of things people are saying, that's good. But you want to be able to collect as much data as possible. You want to be able to collect the data because you want to be able to, uh, you know, see how people are interacting with your game and stuff like that. Darren says, "Can you make a virtual software?" No, I don't want that because you're going to be playtesting the game in person. So I want you to actually playtest the game in person. You're designing a physical board game. You're not designing a digital board game. So I want you to playtest in person. If all you can get is the simulation, then sure, that's fine. It's better than nothing for sure. But I do want you to have a in-person session, and that is difficult to arrange sometimes, um, but it's okay. Remember, they don't need to play the game that many times. They can just play it once or twice as well. But and they don't need to know how to play the game. In fact, they shouldn't know how to play the game. They should just be given the instructions, and then you see what happens. Okay, it might be a disaster. You might need to try to move it along just so you can get somewhere, but you need to give it some time and let them try to figure things out. Okay, I want to see how you interact with them as well. So um, don't try to edit the video or anything like that. Just the whole video. I'm not necessarily going to watch the whole thing, but I need you to have it. And I need you to take notes on stuff like that. I need you to take notes on what happened with their interactions. You can rewatch that recording and notice, what kind of things people did and what they said, what they enjoyed, where they smiled, stuff like that. And then consider revisions. And you need to make revisions based on your playtest. Ideally, your revisions should be based on specifically this playtest. That's the methodology we're looking for. And remember, you're being graded on methodology. So you need to connect what happened in your test and what your players said with something that you should do with the game. You may have had some changes already, based on um, feedback that you got before as well, and that's fine. In any case, record all of the changes between part one and part two. Note down all the changes between part one and part two. So if you're not noting them down now, you should be noting them down now already. Okay? That's why I recommended you delegate at the beginning. I recommended you appoint at least one person to be fully responsible, at least one person to be responsible for documentation. Just writing what you did, not even necessarily involved too much in making changes to the game, but just talking about what you did, like writing down and documenting what you did, because that's a big part of this assignment. A lot of folks forgot this in part one, and that was the biggest problem, that you forgot this or you did it poorly. You didn't organize it well, or what you did have was mostly just a description of the game rules and didn't describe how it evolved over time, didn't have any timings on it, didn't have any kind of order to how you conducted your work. Remember, it said we were looking for methodology. Methodology is how you proceed. It's not just what is your game in the end, it's how did you get there, right? We're looking for how did you get there. You're going to be graded on, yes, did you do the steps? Yes, did you think it through using the concept that we had in our class to apply, good game design techniques? But also your methodology. Did you follow good practices in the process of designing and testing? How will I know that? Based on what you've written and the evidence that you have. Evidence, provide evidence, pictures, the video, stuff like that, right? Those are your evidence of what you did. You just write it down what you did. It doesn't need to be that amazing. It needs to be there. It needs to be organized. And if you don't complete everything perfectly, still submit it anyway, right? If you don't complete all the steps, make sure you submit anyway. Always do that. Even if you didn't finish all of the parts, submit anyway. You will not have any time to resubmit. It will not be extended. We have to showcase on the 14th. That's the only reasonable good day to be able to do that, because the week after that is a break, and then we gotta start our next assignment. Actually, on the 14th, I will announce our next assignment, which we should be focusing on as well. Yeah. Um, I didn't announce it already because I didn't want them overlapping too much. That's pretty much it. No, I'll also, besides that, I want to make sure that I need to make some adjustments to the assignment to allow people who are not in a project management group to still complete the assignment. So I will make some adjustments for that. Yeah. What are the qualities of a good game? Uh, that's that's hard to say. It should have interesting choices. It should have interesting dynamics. Um, your players should enjoy it for it, not because you gave them candy at the beginning or something like that. You know, um, if you give your players, money or candy and have them say that your game is good, that is pointless. I actually don't care if your players say if your game is good or not. So your playtest, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't care if your players actually like your game. That's not the point. The point is that you can learn from it. So if they don't like your game, record that. If they like your game, record that. Both are success. It's only a failure if you can't tell if what they're saying is true. It's only a failure if you bribe them to tell you your game is good, or if you bribe them to tell you your game is bad, then you have failed completely. I don't want you to do that. Okay. Now, your presentation for this part is slightly different. It's not the same as the presentation for part one. This one is just talking about process. You should introduce your game, yes, but then you can see the keywords here are mostly just talking about process and updates. It's a progress update, right? Please remember that as well. I know I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again as many times as I need to. Um, I want to see you talking about what you actually did and what you changed. All right, please pay attention to all these pieces. I strongly recommend that you assign two people to double check to make sure you've submitted everything correctly and submit it ahead of time. Don't try to submit it on Thanksgiving because people are going to be busy on Thanksgiving and they're going to forget. Try to submit it Sunday, okay? Try to go aim for the 12th. And then you can check it again on Monday or check it again on Tuesday morning before 8 o'clock. But nobody wants to do that. So try to make sure you've got all the pieces in on the 12th. That's my recommendation. Of course, if you need to, you have a little bit more time. I did extend it technically until 8 o'clock in the morning on the 14th, so you can submit all of these components by then and still no penalty or anything like that. But I'd recommend you just use the time between like the 12th and the 8 o'clock in the morning on the 14th to just make sure that that it's actually, um, that you have all the pieces in. Okay, yeah. Make sure you upload files and not just like links to them, except for the videos. The videos can be links. Those are supposed to be links, right? You'll notice that the process documentation component has increased in maximum word count because it's expecting you to just build on top of the document for part one and just make a new section for part two and add on to it. That's fine. Okay? And we will showcase the game in class. So all of these are parts of your submission. All of these are part of it. Any questions about it? Any questions at this time? Hopefully you've given it a start so that there's some, you've started to run into challenges or something. Please arrange your playtests ahead of time. Uh, you will find that it is difficult to wrangle people together and communicate with them. That is an important and expected part of this assignment. Get it done. Can you playtest other people's games? Yes, absolutely. You can playtest with each other in the class, like within the class. That's fine. Like I said, you can swap with another team and say, hey, I will. Our team will playtest your game if your team will playtest my game, right? But it doesn't have to be within the class. It can be anyone that is not like a family member or someone close to you. Can playtesting be recorded virtually if you submit a physical version to play in class? Like I said, I want a physical, like I want the people to be physically in the same location to playtest your game because you're supposed to be playtesting a physical game. Again, if all you can do is the digital version, then sure. But the ideal situation that you're trying to achieve is having people in the same room together. Um, it gets a little different chemistry. You need to do at least one in-person playtest. That's right. If you have other playtests before that, definitely note them down. Don't forget to write that stuff down. You will get benefits from that. Right? That is a good thing. Write that down in your process that you had other playtests and what you learned from them. This will only make your assignment stronger. Okay? So please do write down whatever you've done. Um, but yeah, we're supposed to have an actual in-person playtest. Okay, and the showcasing in class is different from that. That's not the same. The one in class is not the same because the playtest that you're supposed to do, that you're supposed to recruit people and actually playtest it with them and record. You're supposed to do that before so that you can take notes and make changes based on that, right? So you do need to show that. I know a lot of you folks have already gone ahead and done a bunch of playtesting. Um, that is great. It's really important to get as much done as you can. This one, you're supposed to try it with people who don't know your game, though. So not people who already have playtested your game. Okay? In some ways, this assignment is easier if your game is bad because you have more to write about, more to improve. In other ways, if you're in some ways, right, if your game is perfect, which it won't be perfect. If your game is very fun, it will be harder though to find things to improve based on player feedback. There will be there will be things to improve. I guarantee you your game will not be perfect. There is no chance there's a 0% chance that your game is perfect and it's ready to take to market and people will pay $40 for your game already. If they will, sure, but can you make it so they'll pay $60 for your game? Every game sucks. That's the thing. Every game has things to improve. There's literally always something to improve. There's always something to improve. I'm just saying it's going to be easier when there's more obvious things to improve. Uh, like if your skill level as a game designer, right? If your skill level as a game designer is down here, then you can deal with problems that are down here, bigger problems. But as your skill level rises, you're going to be able to see smaller and smaller and smaller details, and you're going to be able to understand what to do with those. So you're going to be able to actually pick up on that and improve your game. So the improvement curve of your game is going to go kind of like and of your game designs is going to go kind of like this, right? Your game is going to get a lot better as you know as you get more skilled, right? But then there's going to be smaller and smaller changes that you're going to be looking at as time goes on. There's always going to be something though. Okay? Any concerns about this? Any more questions about this topic before I move on to the lecture? About what you need to submit or about how you're going to be graded, stuff like that. Whatever. If you have a question about that, chances are somebody else has a question about it too. Group joining seems to be working now too. Okay, thank you. Yep, thanks for letting me know. That's good. Um, yeah, again, make sure you check that everyone joined correctly. If you do hand something in, you get marks. Yes. Like if you do part of these steps, you don't complete all of them, you're gonna get decent marks still. If you do, half of it, if you do half of it, you're gonna get more than 50% actually. So please submit whatever you have, regardless. If you meet 50% of what is asked, basically, then you're gonna get actually more than 50% out. All right, let's go to our lecture topic. Let's talk about games as systems. I'll also try and fit in a break here too, guys. I will try to fit in a break about around 1:30. Yeah, so in about an hour. Okay. Uh, a system is a defined set of interacting elements. So this is a very broad definition, right? That form a integrated whole with a common goal. So a system is a bunch of things that have a common goal. And that's why you see this word system used in all sorts of different places, right? You can have a system for organizing your kitchen. You can have a system for designing your game. You can have a system in your game. Your game has systems in it that make fun. You can have a political system. You can have an economic system. You can have a system for determining what you should do next. What is the next thing that you should do in your life. You can have a system for determining what features of your game you should work on next. How you should vote, a voting system, how you should decide and stuff. Are factions a system? What do you mean by that? Like, is a country a system? If it is if it is designed to fit together with a common goal, then you would say that, and the individual elements work together for that. Then yeah. Um, so when we're talking about systems design, though, we're talking about something that is designed to work together, or pieces that are supposed to work together. Um, okay. The so there's a whole area of study around this that talks about how things should interact together and the dynamics of that. Okay, the basic elements of any system, and this will probably help you define what is a system and what isn't. Objects, properties, behaviors, and relationships. These are the things that exist in a system. So, objects interact with each other according to their own internal properties, their behaviors, what they do with each other, right? And relationships between them. So, you could have objects that are ranked, and objects don't need to be inanimate objects. They can be people as well. People can be part of the system, right? People can be objects according to the system theory. So objects are the basic building blocks. Objects are the nouns, all of the things in a system or people. Um, Objects in games include the game pieces in chess, right? In Monopoly, there's this concept called the bank, right? Which is not an individual piece or like a specific object. There's like a tray of money, and that's the bank. And that is a game object. That is an object according to the system of Monopoly. The players themselves are objects. Sometimes you have an avatar in your game. So if you pick the thimble to represent yourself in Monopoly, that is your avatar, and that is a game object. Okay. Areas or terrain, land in your game can be objects as well. You can think of the squares on a chessboard as each one being an object. Okay? They have relationships with each other, they have properties. They do have these things. So objects are defined by their properties, behaviors, and relationships. What you consider a property or not might depend on the context. So uh, if it's part of the definition of your object, then it's definitely a property. If it's not part of the definition of your object, you could change it, and it would not change what your object is. Then maybe it's not a property. So properties are the qualities and the attributes. They might define the physical shape of the object if it's relevant to the gameplay. They might define the look of an object again if it's relevant to gameplay. Um, the space within the game is a coordinate system. Hmm. Yeah. Uh, so in a video game, basically you're gonna have variables, and all of your variables in your video game are gonna be properties of your objects, right? So you're learning a little bit of C sharp. You're learning to declare variables. All those variables, if they're whatever object they're related to, those are properties of that object, right? In an RPG style game, we have these common set of mechanics now where your character will have certain numbers representing how much vitality they have in them, how healthy they are. We have a number representing how strong they are. We have a number representing how agile they are. We have a number representing their experience and power overall, stuff like that. But we also have other properties that are more transient that change a lot, like location. And sometimes these things might be relevant, and sometimes these things might not be relevant, depending on your game. Right? The look of a chess piece, in particular, how it's themed, might not affect how you actually play the game. As long as you can tell what piece is what, the look of a chess piece won't change how you play the game. Right? In tennis, you know, you have tennis rackets. They have some properties that are important, right? There's some properties of a tennis racket that are important that you need to keep consistent. Otherwise, you don't have a tennis racket. You have some other kind of object that isn't allowed in the game. Um, you can modify your tennis racket slightly. You can change the grip a little bit. You can change the tension on the strings or something like that. Um, but what you can't do is make your tennis racket like 3 meters long and giant. Um, that would not be allowed. That would be changing some properties that you're not allowed to change. That changes what it is. It's no longer a tennis racket when you do that. I don't know what it is, but it's not a tennis racket anymore. Or if you instead you swap out the strings for a steel blade, yeah, I don't think that's a tennis racket anymore either. But there's definitely some properties you can change while it still remains a tennis racket. Just some you can't change. Uh, you don't swap the head of the tennis racket for a blade, then you're not playing tennis anymore. That's not the same object, right? So in a lot of RPGs, role playing games, this is you have all of these numbers and stuff like that. These are your properties of your character. So Diablo here is an action RPG. You have these stats. You have this level. You have a name. You have your hit points. You know, you have a bunch of equipment that you have as well. Lots of stuff. Sometimes you don't need that many properties. An ARPG like Diablo has a lot of properties, but in checkers, there's only three properties: color, location, and in checkers there's a special rule that lets you uh, upgrade a checker, and so that is a property that you would have to keep track of. For example, if you were to code it, then you would need to store this information. This information would be need to relate to every single individual piece, uh, or something like that. You need to somehow find a way to have a variable representing this. Some way to represent that. Objects, of course, have behaviors. They have actions they can take, right? Objects can perform actions. So in Diablo, you can walk, you can run, you can fight, you can use items, stuff like that, right? Um, when you have more behaviors, it can become less predictable. But you don't need necessarily to have a whole lot of behaviors to have a complex game. A checker in the game checkers has only two things. It can move diagonally or it can jump over another piece. And that's about it. So it can move one square or it can move two squares diagonally. That's about it. Um, that's all it can do. But the game can actually still end up quite complex. When you don't have relationships between objects, then you have a collection. So the checker pieces themselves on the same team don't have any particular relationship with each other, aside from their relative position. So you could say that's a collection, and they don't have a relationship with each other. But they do have a relationship with the uh, opposing side's pieces because they are enemies. They can fight each other. Um, you could say that their only common relationship is they don't fight each other. I guess there's that. Um, okay, so if you have a stack of blank cards, they don't have a relationship with each other. But once you start, adding playing card numbers, right? You have numbers and letters to those cards. Now they have ranks. They have relationships between each other. You might say that a three is a less than a four, right? I know it's crazy, right? But a three is less than a four. They have a relationship with each other, right? A uh, queen is uh, greater than a jack. There's a relationship. If you do remove a card from that deck, you have changed now the dynamics of any game played with that deck of cards. Now you have a change in the probability of drawing any one card. Um, so that's interesting. Relationships can be expressed in a few different ways. In a board game, just location can describe relationships, and that can be quite powerful. In the deck of cards, there's kind of like a hierarchy, and in some games, that relationship is treated differently. So in some games, two is a small number, and in some games, two is actually a big number. Two is actually worth a lot. Um, in some games, an ace is just one, or in some games an ace is worth more, right? An ace is not a one. An ace is actually a one or an 11, right? In a deck of cards, the relationship is fixed. Every card's relationship with every other card remains the same. But you can also have loose relationships between things when you have stuff like relative position of objects. So these can change over time. As pieces move across the board, their relationship between each other is changing. In The Sims, a sim has different priorities, and their relationship with different objects changes based on that priority. So they might be more interested in the refrigerator at some points, and then they might be more interested in the toilet at other points, and they might be more interested in the computer at some points, and they might be more interested in another sim at some points. So they have different relationships. Player choices can influence relationships. So of course you have RPGs, stuff like that. But we love when player choice changes the rules of a game or changes the behavior of a system. And one great way to do that is when a player choice affects how two things relate to each other, or affects some properties that affect some relationships. Sometimes we use elements of chance. So a lot of RPGs use element of chance, role playing games, um, and strategy games can also use elements of chance. So, for example, in the strategy war fighting game Warcraft 2, uh, you can have soldiers, you can train soldiers, and they can fight each other. Like an orc and a human warrior might fight, and when the orc attacks the human warrior with his sword, he will deal a certain amount of damage between 50% and 100% of this formula. So this number will be calculated based on the orc's own property of their damage, the property of their opponent, the human character's armor, and a property of the orc again, the amount of piercing damage that they have. Okay, that will ignore armor. Okay, and then this number, maybe it's like 10, they will do between 50 and 100% of that. So they'll be doing between 5 and 10 damage. So there's some probabilistic outcome there. And this is exciting for us in a play situation because it allows us to have some control over probabilities, but adding that probabilistic element makes the outcomes of a battle a little bit less predictable. So maybe sometimes the orc will win against that human, and maybe sometimes the human will win against the orc. It might be that there is a difference in ratios, like the orc is more likely to win in 2/3 of fights. In 2/3 of the time, the orc will win, but it's not 100%, right? Uh, so, oh, Garen says attacking from the low ground to high ground has a 50% hit chance. Oh yeah, oh yeah. So if you have the high ground, then it's over for your opponent. Yeah. Of course, that can change if you have an air unit and then you're attacking high ground from the sky. Then you don't have that disadvantage. That's a different story. Okay, in chess, there are 6 types of chess piece. Each piece has properties. Actually, you could say you have the pieces, and then you also have all of the boards squares, right? And some of the squares are black and some of them are white. Each of those pieces, I'm just talking about the pieces right now, each of the pieces has a certain location and a certain behaviors where it can move in certain ways. So the queen can move in, 8 directions, any number of squares, but it cannot jump over things. The knight the knight is actually the only piece that is able to jump over things, but it can. So that's neat. Um, there's 64 spaces on the board, and the way they're spaced is in alternating order, black and white. Uh, Actually, the black squares and the white squares don't really matter except for setting up your game in the beginning. So technically, you don't need to know at any given point if a square is black or white. It's not actually a major mechanic. It it would be kind of cursed to. I don't know of ever seeing a chess game played without it. But technically, you don't need the black and the white squares. It's not actually important. Yeah. There's no game mechanic specifically about the square color. But what is important is that they are adjacent to each other. And they have these adjacencies, right? Uh, and there's ends of the board. Uh, Chess would be played very differently if this corner piece was connected to the piece on the other side. That would be a totally different game, right? If at the end of the board game, at the end of the board, you would actually be able to loop around to the other side. That's a totally different game. So that tells you that the relationship between these squares on the chessboard is actually important. The positional relationship between these squares, the type of space that your game is played in, the coordinate system of your game, actually matters. Jamelin, yes, the bishops only move on the same color, but you wouldn't actually need the colors to make that happen because the bishops already have a movement pattern, right? Like you don't need the color to say that. Actually, bishops can't just move anywhere that has the same color. They only move in a diagonal, right? So it just helps us read the board, yeah. The colors on the board are for legibility. They're not required, yeah. Legibility is definitely important. Like being able to see the board and read it and understand is definitely important. Don't get me wrong. Um, it's just yeah, it's not technically required to be able to play the game. So what's interesting about chess, and it's a really great thing to study, is that the individual properties of these objects and things, they're not really that complex, right? It's actually really easy to learn the rules of chess. It's so easy. In fact, it's something that people would say is what you say easy to learn, hard to master, right? There's so much going on in chess in terms of dynamics, even though it has very little in terms of mechanics, which is quite amazing. It's all about the relationships between the objects and their positioning. And the fact that you can only move one piece at a time actually is really good for the game. The fact that you can only do one action per turn makes a lot of interesting dynamics happen. Sometimes less is more. It makes a lot of interesting strategy. If you can move all of the chess pieces all the time on every turn, that's a totally different game, and it's a little bit more of a bloodbath and a lot less strategic, actually, which is really interesting. Adding more behaviors, adding more options does not make your game better. And it doesn't always make your game more complex. It doesn't always make your game more interesting. Let's talk about dynamics, because that is all about dynamics. The reason that chess has so many ways it can go, despite having such simple rules, is all because of dynamics. The how the relationship between these things, how it evolves over time. So when you change anything about that order, when you change any of the properties of those objects in a interconnected system, you can dramatically change what's going on. You can dramatically change the outcomes. Let's look at uh, that formula for damage in Warcraft, right? So before it was between 50% and 100% of a certain like damage formula. Now, let's say, okay, what if we scrap that and instead it's between 1 and 20 damage that you will do. You will do between 1 and 20, and maybe your soldiers have 20 hit points. So every time somebody attacks, there is an amount of uh, pain, amount of you know loss of hit points to the receiver of the attack, equal to this random dice roll, and the variance of this has changed. So previously, where it might have been 10 to 20, now it's 1 to 20, right? Okay. So we have some slight variations in the dynamics of the game. Um, Maybe better, maybe worse. We'll have to figure some stuff out. What happens to it? How does it change the outcome of an individual battle between individual foot soldiers? You know, it's a war simulation. You have a bunch of soldiers fighting with swords and shields and armors and knights and stuff like that, right? So you have two soldiers. They've met on the field of battle. They're going to duel. Now the outcome of the battle is harder to predict. Now all soldiers are equal. So let's say all the soldiers are equal, right? Um, Whichever unit attacks fastest would win an equal fight. Oh, yeah, good point. Great point. Then it would matter a lot who can attack first and who can attack faster. Or maybe it would matter just more who has more people, who has more soldiers. Or if they had a bow and arrow instead. Hmm. So, what would change about how the game is played? How would it change outcomes of a battle? Right? So you have individual battles, and what about the outcome of the game? What about the value of other things in the game, right? Um, Making such a change like this, changing this number from 10 to 20 to 1 to 20, changes a lot about the game. So, how would players play differently in this situation if there's a little less predictability in the outcome of a battle for individual soldiers? You can try to guess. Sometimes you do need to just test it, but you can definitely try to guess, and it does help to be able to do that, right? So these two soldiers are going to fight. You have a lot less, uh, a lot harder of a time figuring out who will win on a 1v1 level. On a larger scale, what you might be thinking differently. So how would a player think differently? Maybe in this type of game, there's more chance in the battle, but that doesn't mean that there's no way to play around it. If it's at least fair, like the game still has the same rules for everyone, maybe you'll just be thinking differently. How does this change things? You could outproduce them. Maybe you have more soldiers. Yeah. So maybe it you know your goal is to not meet as equals on the field of battle, which actually should probably never be the goal anyway. If you're trying to win, you're not trying to take fair fights. So maybe you have battle lines. So these are your soldiers. They have a flag. Okay. Um, Maybe you don't want this where you meet equally on the field of battle. Maybe instead what you want is something like you have more you have more dudes than them, and your dudes have surrounded them on a couple sides instead, so that you actually have more guys fighting them than they have fighting you. You have a more surface area. Like geometrically, the geometry makes it so that you have more people attacking them than they have attacking you. Actually, even if you have the same number of people, right? Even if you had the exact same number of people, then you would still you would still gain advantage, and actually you would be more likely to win by surrounding your opponent with the fewer people that you have, because then what you would have is the advantage of having greater surface area. Yeah, build a bigger arc of soldiers. Like you just have more guys able to swing your sword at them than they have guys able to swing the sword at you. Because all of their guys, some of their guys are sitting here in the middle and are not able to fight. because they're waiting for the guy in front of them to fall down so that they can get to the front. Yeah. So there is still strategy in this strange, like more random version of the game. There is still strategy. It's just a little different. We've changed the dynamics. Okay. And then if we have resources and upgrades, maybe there's a lot of value in collecting resources. There's a lot of value in building a bigger army. You need to try to build a bigger army than your opponent for sure. So that becomes very important for sure. Um, but otherwise, you know, if you have upgrades that say, okay, you do +1 damage, um, it might be a lot less effective here in this, 1 to 21 situation. Maybe. It can be hard to say sometimes. Sometimes you need to simulate it. But regardless, whatever you do, if you change one part of the system, you're going to change the effects on the rest of the game. So in this case, we change the damage formula slightly, and what it will do is change how people will choose to play the game if they want to play it well, right? It'll change um, the best strategies. It'll change the dynamics, which will lead to different strategies, right? Okay, so let's talk about dynamics. And one of the most important things to understand in dynamics is what's called a feedback loop. So when I say feedback loop, I'm not talking about reward and punishment. Okay? I'm not talking about reward and punishment. That is feedback in when it comes to the topic of motivation. Okay? Um, that's not the same. So when we use the term feedback loop specifically, we're talking about something else. Sometimes you'll use the term feedback uh, like good feedback or bad feedback, something like that. That's not what we're looking at either. We're not looking at good or bad. Not good or bad, not reward or punishment. Not even positive feedback as in you're doing a great job or negative feedback as in you're not doing a great job. Not that either. When I say in terms of in the context of a game system, a positive feedback loop, okay, is a situation where you have a effect that is growing over time because it is directly related to its own cause. So it doesn't actually necessarily need to be something that is increasing either. It could also be something that is decreasing. As long as it's doing so because it's directly related to its own cause. In mathematics or in statistics, there's something called correlation, right? Oh, I spelled that wrong. Right? It's basically when things are positively correlated and they feed back into themselves. Okay, so I'm seeing some good answers here, like level progression or loot farm. Yes, these are examples of positive feedback loops. Great. Negative feedback loops look like this. And again, this is talking about an abstract level. The thing that is increasing or decreasing could be a lot of different things. You call it just the signal or the effect. Okay? So a negative feedback loop, if something is out of balance, it will get it in balance. So it will instead of diverging in any direction, it will converge. That's a negative feedback loop. It's self-regulating. So this is a question: if something is positive or negative, a positive feedback or negative feedback loop, it is a question of if it extends to infinity in either the positive or negative direction, doesn't matter. whatever you're measuring. It doesn't positive and negative in terms of sign is not a thing. We're just talking about the magnitude of this effect, the absolute value of whatever effect you're talking about. And that effect could be a lot of different stuff. It could be score, it could be your experience level, your power level as a player, all sorts of things. So, let's look at some examples. Here's a common game mechanic. Defeat powerful enemies, and that will generate experience points for you. Experience points will increase your player power. If you have more player power, you can defeat more powerful enemies, which will generate even more experience points for you. Is this a positive or a negative feedback loop? Joshua, yes, you're exactly correct. It's positive because it feeds onto itself. That's what makes it positive. It could be a negative effect on the player. It could be something the player doesn't want, for example, but it's still a positive feedback loop because it feeds into itself. Cool. So, defeating more powerful enemies generates more XP. Positive feedback loop. Yeah. So, what are the variables that are changing here? What are the effects? So, in a positive feedback loop, effects increases, or just you'll say it grows in absolute value. A negative feedback loop, the effect stabilizes. So what is changing here? The enemy power is increasing. XP is increasing, and player power. Those are all increasing together, and they feed into each other. Okay, number 2, positive or negative feedback loop. Your body will sweat when it gets hot. It'll actually sweat more and more as it gets hotter and hotter. Airflow over that sweat will actually take heat away from your body. Is this a positive or negative feedback loop? Does the effect grow or does the effect stabilize? And what are the effects here? What is the thing that is changing here? Can we give reasoning? We need to give our reasoning. Hmm. Heat. So heat is definitely a thing that's changing. Heat and sweat, right? Um, so what's happening here? Let's look at what this means if we graph this over time. What happens to heat? So if heat is our variable, what happens to heat? So body is getting hotter, but we start to sweat. So actually, the heat stabilizes. So when you see this, or even if it goes like this, right? It could even, once you start sweating, then you drop temperature and then it stabilizes below like that. If you take away the sweating, it's positive? No. I mean, it's not a feedback loop if it's just your body gets hot and your body that's it. That's not a feedback loop. A feedback loop requires the output to feed back into the input. So it actually if the rest didn't happen, this still in itself isn't even a feedback loop. It's just a thing that happens at that point. Um, it would have to be something that feeds back into itself. Yeah. So this is a negative feedback loop. Body gets hot and then airflow? No, that's not a positive feedback loop either. I don't see how that's a positive feedback loop. If the air was too humid to take in the sweats? Oh, then then that just wouldn't be I think that still wouldn't be a feedback loop because the air itself isn't making you hotter. It would just be that your temperature is going up, but it wouldn't be accelerating. A positive feedback loop feeds back into itself and makes the situation stronger. It's not the same as something that's constant. If you want to think about it mathematically, a positive feedback loop is a relationship that is like linear or greater. In the like, if you were to write a polynomial to describe it, it would not include linear functions. If that makes any sense. Okay. Okay. Number 3. As your body gets cold, you start to shiver. Your shivering increases your body heat. Aha. Also negative. Why? What's changing? What's being in regulation? So your body is cold. You start to shiver. Your body heat is increasing now. And then you don't need to shiver anymore. You're shivering. Maybe you don't actually have to shiver as much once you're actually warm enough. And then, but maybe when you're not shivering, then you get colder, and then you have to shiver again, and so it goes like this, right? So something is going up. Your body heat is going up, right? By you shivering, it increases your body heat, but it's not increasing exponentially. It's not making itself increase again. It's just regulating your temperature. Yeah, it takes it back to a stable temperature. So both of these work together. Actually, they're both part of negative feedback loops. That your body has a internal thermostat, right? That your body tries to regulate your heat because it has a certain operating temperature. Your body has an operating temperature. It needs to operate at that, otherwise problems occur. So it tries hard to maintain that. Okay, how about number 4? The rich get richer. Positive or negative feedback loop. So let's say in your game, if your player has a lot of money, they can easily turn that money into more money. And then the more money they have, the more money they can make. Let's say you can grow your money by 20% every day in the game, you're going to very soon have a lot of money. If it grows by 20% and you have $100, you're going to gain $20. If you have $1,000, you're going to gain $200, even more than you would have gained if you were 100 if you had $100, right? The rich get richer. Positive. Okay. Positive feedback loop. Okay, number 5. The poor get poorer. Is that a positive or negative feedback loop? Okay, so let's say you start here. Uh, you have a net worth of negative $1,000. You start there, and you get even more poor. There has to be a limit to how much you can borrow. Oh yeah, but there's no limit to how much interest you can get charged. There actually is, but um, you know, let's talk about this as a game mechanic or just in general a dynamic, right? Up to a point, you can definitely until bankruptcy, basically. Yeah, so it is actually a positive feedback loop because the signal is growing. It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter anything except the absolute value, right? So it doesn't matter if it's going up or down, as long as you have this shape, this curve, right? If you have a curve where the ratio of rise over run is changing every time, you have a positive feedback loop. I mean, changing to be greater, right? If this is getting longer every time, that's a positive feedback loop. So it is the same thing as the rich get richer, but just in terms of growing debt instead of growing wealth. Exactly the same. Positive feedback loop. Poor get poorer is a positive feedback loop. Remember that. It doesn't matter if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't matter if it's actually specifically that it's increasing or decreasing. Positive and negative feedback loop isn't about increasing or decreasing specifically. It's about stabilizing or destabilizing. In StarCraft, you spend minerals to make more bases and workers. If you have more workers and bases, it allows you to mine more minerals. Positive or negative feedback loop. Should be easy now, right? You have an idea of how it works. We should also notice that positive feedback loops in games are really fun because this is fun to do when you get bigger and bigger and bigger. If you ever played a game where you can get rich, it's really fun to do this. Like, this is really fun. It's fun to see things get out of control. In a game, sometimes this could be kind of fun too, just to see how crazy things can get. It really can be. Yeah, in Papers, Please, it was really fun. In a horrifying way. It really was. So that's a positive feedback loop. What's increasing? Your mineral wealth, your number of bases, and your number of workers in StarCraft. Great. In Civilization, like a strategy game where you know, build a civilization to stand the test of time. You know, you 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 can build cities, and those build when you build cities, you can build combat units from those cities, soldiers, and those soldiers can help you conquer more cities. Positive or negative feedback loop. Positive. What's growing? Your cities and your combat units. Number 8, in Civilization, same game. When you have combat units, you can build combat units. They cost money to produce, and you also pay resources for every combat unit you own every turn. So you build when you build more soldiers, they cost you more. So you can build less. The cost to produce and the cost to own them every turn means that, let's say, if you get 5 gold every turn and it costs you 2 gold to make a soldier, then you can make two soldiers every turn, right? But not forever. On turn one, you can make a soldier. So you have one soldier. On turn two, you can build uh, so a soldier is going to cost you -1 gold per turn. On turn 2, you can also build another soldier. Uh, so you have now you have 2 soldiers. Okay, but you also are spending 1 gold per turn on upkeep of that soldier last time. Then on turn 3, you can't build any more soldiers because now you're paying. Oh, I guess you could try to build one. Yeah, you could try to build one. So you're paying. You can pay 2 gold to build one, and you're also paying 2 gold every turn to keep the soldiers that you have already, and now you have 3 soldiers. But on turn 4, you reach the limit where you're now paying 3 gold per turn. You could build one more soldier, but you're now paying 3 gold per turn for just having those soldiers. And the next turn, you'll be paying 4 gold per turn for having those soldiers. And you will not be able to sustain this because you will now be losing money every turn. If you try to make more soldiers, it's going to get worse. You're going to start losing money every turn. So you come to a limit. It is self-regulating. Yes, it's a negative feedback loop because it costs this money. If you don't have this money, you can't buy them, so you can't make more. And you can see how number 7 and number 8 work together nicely. So it's very common you in a game you want to have positive feedback loops and you want to have negative feedback loops. You want to have both. You want to have them kind of built in so that they can regulate themselves. You have a little bit of switches and dials. You can levers and switches you can pull to modify things, right? So in the same game, you can build more combat units to conquer more cities, but then as you have more combat units, you have to pay more upkeep. So in order to pay those soldiers, you have a few options. You can try to conquer more cities. You can just keep trying to conquer more and pillage the lands so you can pay your soldiers. But eventually you're going to run up to a limit, right? So you can have so many soldiers, you can build up an army, you can try to conquer all of the land, uh, but there will come a point where you get diminishing returns and you just can't sustain this anymore. And then you have all of these soldiers, but it costs too much to maintain. You know, then you got to figure out something else to do. And then even worse, what happens if you make peace? Maybe you're fighting a war, but the war ends. You fully conquer the entire country that you were fighting a war with, right? This is all war. You you declare war on your neighboring country and you completely conquer all of their cities and take all of their land and you've trained a bunch of combat units from their cities and now you have all of these soldiers that you need to pay every every day. You need to pay them, and if you don't pay them, you're gonna have problems. So you have some choices now, and this is what makes it interesting that you now have these dynamics in conflict with each other. You're creating dilemma for the player. You're creating a hard choice for them. So their war is over, but you have all of these hundreds of thousands of veteran warriors who know nothing except how to kill. Uh, you have 100,000 guys who are out there who have experienced war for many years and they're very good at killing. And now you need to decide what to do with them. You can try to integrate them back into the workforce. You will lose the money that you invested to train them in the first place because you did have to invest money as well to train them. So that'll be that'll be gone, right? Uh, so you can try and downsize your army, right? You can demilitarize, right? You can destroy military equipment. You can tell these soldiers to go work on a farm instead or something, whatever. You can try and make peace, and then spend your money instead of spending it on soldiers, spending on improving the living conditions of your people, or other things like that. Okay, or you could say, hey, you know what? I already have all these soldiers. You know what I will do instead? I'll just declare war on someone else. More war. So that you can grow your soldiers more. Fight someone else. Just because, hey, I already have all of these powerful soldiers, I may as well just declare another war for no reason. Or I'll try to make up a thinly veiled reason to start another war with someone else. And that's a really interesting decision, right? Um, and then what are some other balancing factors to stop that? Well, if you make war with everyone that is your neighbor as a country, everyone's going to kind of hate you, and that could be a problem as well, right? Um, so all of these interactions are really great if you include all of these. And then what happens when you conquer the world and you only have soldiers? I don't know. What do you do? We don't ask what happens after that. Yeah, I guess you just start a civil war. You start fighting with yourself. Yeah, nothing quite civil as war for sure. Yeah. Uh, so great job, folks. We examined positive and negative feedback loops. Looked at examples. Make sure you don't forget this. You will be quizzed on this at some point. I won't say when, right? So remember, don't confuse them with reinforcement and punishment, or reward and punishment. Don't confuse that with reinforcements, positive or negative reinforcement. There's another concept as called positive and negative reinforcement, which is reward and punishment. Not the same as positive and negative feedback loops. Totally different. Okay? Don't confuse them. Positive reinforcement is rewarding somebody for doing something good. So when your dog, uh, when your dog doesn't eat something on the floor, you give it a treat. That's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is punishment for something they shouldn't do, right? That's like yelling at your dog for eating something on the floor, you know, which they might not understand anyway, but there's also positive and negative punishment, but that's a different story. Or basically, you can punish people for not doing what you want them to do instead. But yeah, anyway. Uh, so often we want to have games designed with interesting decisions that contain blends of positive and negative feedback loops. Like we talked about with that civilization example of having soldiers, but having those soldiers allows you to protect your land and take other people's land, but it also costs you money, right? It costs you money to maintain them, right? A game without positive feedback loops is usually pretty boring. A game with no negative feedback loops gets out of control too quickly and gets to the point where it quickly becomes unfun. So you do want to have a balance of both. So it's nice if you have a negative feedback loop, if you have something that's relatively stable to begin with, but you want to have ripples in it. You don't want it to just be flat. You can make a game very stable by just making it constant, but that's also really boring. Nothing ever happens. So instead, you want a game that allows things to go out of control, but then brings them back to baseline, right? So you want to be able to have spikes of stuff. You want to be able to allow people to get richer. You don't want to be allow. You want to allow people to do stuff like that, right? You do want that, but you just need to add some limitations to it. So you might think of your game as having some, you know, good playable parameters. If your game stays within this range, it's fun. If it goes outside that range, it becomes quite unfun. Let's say it's like player advantage. Um, if you have a player versus player game, like a 1v1 player versus player game, maybe it's a strategy game or something like that, your game can go one way or another, right? And maybe if a player is having an advantage, they will get more advantage for that. So you have a positive feedback loop. That's cool. But you don't want that to go on forever because it will just become unfun really quickly. So what you want instead is for there to be a limit. When they hit this soft limit, you have some kind of soft caps or soft rubber banding mechanics, you might say. Some people might call it humpback mechanics. It can come in the terms of diminishing returns, stuff like how in Civilization, if you have a bigger army, it costs you more, and people might band against you, right? So that it comes to a check, right? So you keep it within check. You keep it within a point where it can go the other way, right? So you have these parameters set, and you use your tools as a game designer to create these kind of like soft and hard limits either way, right? If anyone ever played like MOBA games or something like that, they're great for having these roller coaster moments and stuff like that. The more you have to lose. In Dota, when you get strong, the strong can get stronger, but if the underdog, the weak ones, defeat the strong ones, then they will get very powerful very quickly. So it can jump back and forth. Resources. Let's talk about resources. Oh, actually, it's about time for us to take a quick break. Let's take a break. Let's break to 140 ish. Let's break to 140. Okay, I'll give it a pause, and we'll come back at 140. All right, so we're back from our little break. Um, let's talk resources. We can't talk about economies without talking about resources. We're not. So let's figure it out. We talked before about abstract and concrete resources. Anyone remember that? If you remember, you can have hit points. That's a resource. You can have money. That's a resource. You can have stat points that say that you have 50 strength or 15 endurance or something like that. Those are also concrete. Um, in your inventory in The Sims, you might own a refrigerator. That is a concrete resource for sure. Those are things that you have for sure. You also have stuff that you can track in terms of numbers that you might not expect you can consider a resource. So if in your game you can double jump, that's a resource. It is something that you trade for position. Um, let's say in Celeste, the platforming game, it's kind of like a Mario kind of game, but with a few more mechanics. Okay, you can jump off a platform, and then you can jump again in the air, right? That's called double jump, right? Um, so you could say that you start with two jump charges, and indeed in the game it might count it like this. You start with two jump charges. When you jump from the ground, you spend one, so now you have one jump charge, and then you can spend it again to now you have zero jump charges, and then when you touch the ground, then it'll refund you up to two. It'll give you two jump charges, right? So it'll refill it to the max. So you could say that's how it works. So you get this when you touch the ground. Is rolling a resource in Dark Souls? Rolling is the action. Stamina is the resource. So rolling is you trading your stamina to move. It's like a action that you can take based on you having the resource. So the jumping itself here is not the resource. When I'm saying this, I'm saying the jump charges, the number of jumps that you have in Celeste, which is in Dark Souls, you spend stamina to roll. So it's stamina is the resource. You can also have abstract resources, right? We talked about time. You can spend time finding the perfect hiding spot. to be able to ambush your opponent, right? You could get information. You know that they are going to be traveling along this road. You spend the time figuring out this information, okay? And then when the time is right, you go and hide behind a bush. This is you. I'm trying to draw you. This is us hiding behind the bush, okay? Um, all right, that's us hiding behind the bush. We're like a bandit. We're gonna steal from our target, okay? And our target is coming along. Okay, our target is coming along this path, and we are hiding and waiting to jump out of the bushes and to rob them. Um, yeah, you guys got it. Yeah, nice. Um, so you spent that time, okay, and you got the right information, and you have developed yourself the element of surprise, and you have to spend that element of surprise to try to steal stuff from this person, right? Um, once you jump out, you've given up the element of surprise, but you used it to surprise someone, right? But it did cost you something to get there, right? Like you spent the time, um, you spent the energy, all that stuff. But these are hard to describe in terms of a number. It's more abstract. That's not supposed to be Swiper's weapon. That's supposed to be his tail. Uh, that's supposed to be his tail. Okay, he's not supposed to have a weapon. Anyway, resources can be created, destroyed, converted, or traded. All of these can be created, destroyed, controlled, converted, or traded. You can have goodwill, as you could say that's an abstract resource. Um, it can be hard to trade that sometimes, but you can have it. You can do the mafia boss a great favor. He can owe you a service, and maybe he'll fulfill that service for you at some point in the future. So let's talk about economy. A game economy or an economy is a place where you exchange resources. It doesn't have to be specific to a game with trading NPCs or players or something like that. We often in game design talk about economies that have nothing to do with money, right? I think someone actually mentioned something else already, like turn economy, earlier today in our lecture already. Somebody said something like turn economy in chess. Yeah, turn economy is a thing. Um, for sure, right? So e- obviously economies exist in games where you can trade items and gold and stuff like that for sure, right? But economies also exist. There's an experience economy or a spell learning economy, a knowledge economy. In Dungeons and Dragons, you can have what's called an action economy. Um, in Dungeons, lots of good economies are based on things that are not money. Actually, we'll see. We'll talk about it. Uh, in Dungeons and Dragons, you have normally you have only a couple things you can do every turn. You can move, and you can take one of several actions. If you look at this, you can also see how this gets copied over to a lot of other game designs in the future, where your characters can move and they can do an action and that kind of thing. Anyway, uh, usually you have only one action, actually, one major action. So normally in the game, that's all you can do. You can trade things a little bit though. You can trade an action to move more. You can double move, right? You can move further. You can dash, but then you can't do any other action. Okay, and there's certain things you can do with the game rules and certain abilities and things like that that will give you more action. So you can do multiple things at once. And if you ever played a game like this is extremely powerful. Like being able to do two things where an opponent can do only one thing is really powerful, right? Or being able to stop your opponent from taking an action, right? If you can bind them or make their action worthless or something like that, you know, uh, that is a big deal. So we're thinking about how to manage the economy of actions. It's an action economy. How can we maximize the number of actions we can take and minimize the number of actions the opponent can take, or minimize the effect of those? And how can we make sure that we're using our actions efficiently, right? So we're not wasting our own actions. How to use them smart. How to spend smart. So in economies, we need to pay attention to stuff like what the resources need to have value to a player. In Dungeons and Dragons, the action as a resource value has very great value to the player because there's so many different things you can do with an action. If you get an extra action, you can do a lot of stuff. Great. If you have money in a game and that money can buy things that are useful, then that resource has value. If you have money in the game, but the money can't buy anything that you actually care about, the resource is pointless. It's useless. Don't care about that money. You know, the value of that resource might change over time, over the course of the game, as well. So in Magic: The Gathering, the card game, you start with 20 hit points. If you reach zero, you die. You lose the game. Your opponent wins the game. You start with 20. When you have 20 hit points, uh, you can feel free sacrificing uh, 5 hit points to gain advantage in the game, for sure. But at some point later, if you have 3 hit points left, now every one of those counts. Every one of those is really important. Later in the game, you have 3 hit points. Everyone counts. So it seems to feel like it increases in value because of a decrease in quantity, because you have far less. Meanwhile, you could also do something else. At some point in the game, you know, you could execute a combo or something like that, and somehow end up with 100 hit points. At this point, you are totally happy spending 20 like it's nothing. I'm talking about Magic the Gathering, but yeah, the game. But it doesn't. This applies to other games as well, right? It doesn't matter if you have a resource and the supply changes, the value also changes. So supply is increased. I have now have 100 hit points, and I don't need that many. The value of each individual hit points drops for me, so I am totally comfortable spending 20. Whereas previously, I would not have been comfortable spending 20 because that would be my whole life, and I would lose the game instantly. So think about the value of resources and how it changes over time in the game. If players tend to gain more over time, right? If the size of the economy grows over time in the game, if over time players in your Dungeons and Dragons game get more actions, then over time their opponents should probably also get more actions, or they need to get more opponents, or something like that. Um, how is the supply of resources controlled? So how do you keep it in check so that they don't go crazy out of control in a way that you can't really have fun with anymore? How do you set prices in your economy? How do you set like a floor and a ceiling to prices? When I talk about prices, I don't just mean money. I mean just in general the cost of things. So in all of this resource trading, any type of resource, right? Um, you need to find ways to set a floor and a ceiling to all this. Is it controlled at all, or is it completely uncontrolled? Is there some kind of methods of regulation that help you set a floor and a ceiling? If it's a hard floor or a soft floor, it can be helpful to have those controls to be able to do that. Let's talk about it a little again as well. Yeah. Um, we'll look at some examples. Sources and sinks. When it comes to resources, you need to understand where the resources are coming into your economy and where they are leaving your economy. So no matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's hit points or if it's uh, uh, player level or if it's gold. You need to know where it's coming from and where it's going. So any source is where it's being created. If in your MMORPG, players can go out into the wild and kill monsters, and those monsters will drop gold, then you are printing money. You're literally printing money. This can have serious negative effects on any economy if you're constantly printing money. So you need to think about how to control that. So your source is like a tap, uh, right? It is constantly, it is generating supply in your market, okay, and it's filling up this bucket. You don't want to over flood this bucket. You want to have a relatively stable supply. You might want a relatively stable supply that is growing, but you don't want it to be something that you can't control the growth of, because then you will have big problems. And we'll talk about what those problems can be as well. We'll talk about that. So you want to have sinks. Sinks are anything that removes this resource from the economy, right? Sinks are anything that takes things out of the economy. If you have more sink than source, then your economy will eventually drain and there will be nothing left. If you have more source than sink, then your economy will eventually overflow. Might want a stable rate so that you can keep up with the growth and just have constant growth that you can monitor. You might want that. Um, so examples in this MMORPG case where you're printing money by defeating monsters, tax players whenever they make transactions with shopkeepers, whenever they make transactions with each other, right? Charge them some money, and that money isn't going anywhere. That money is just getting straight up deleted because they are printing money by killing these monsters. These monsters spawn with money. It's fair that you're also deleting money. Yeah. So charge them money to teleport to different places, to travel. Charge them money to, like, rest their character and recover themselves. Charge them money to trade with each other, like a percentage based amount for every transaction, right? Something like that that is scalable. If you have only fixed rates, then uh, this will become a problem, because when you have people who are very rich, then 5 gold will mean nothing to them, so it's not a problem. But if you have only percentages, then people who are poor will pay nothing. There can be positive and negatives to each one. Sometimes you want to have both. Imagine it like this: you know, if you charged players for, let's say, killing another player, a player has to pay 5 gold for their crime. Okay, then a rich player who has 100 gold doesn't care. It's not a crime for them. Basically, it's just like a very slight fee in order to kill another player. Their only punishment is a fine, and it's a very small fine relative to the amount of wealth they have. They have 10 million gold coins. They don't care. They're just going to kill any player they want. If you charge that player 10%, then the rich player, it's going to cost them so much money. They have 10,000 coins. It's going to cost them 10% of their wealth. They're not going to bother doing it. It's going to cost them 1,000 coins each time. Not worth it. But a poor person with barely a dollar to their name, with only 1 coin in their inventory, will have no problem murdering everyone in the entire world, because they will not pay a darn thing, because it's only percentage based. What if you include both, if you include both, minus 5, spend 5 plus 10% of your wealth, then there's something, right? Or charge the greater of the two, or something like that. Then there's something. There's an interesting tool here. I'll link it to you guys, uh, called Machinations, that is great for analyzing systems dynamics. You can kind of build economic models, whatever your thing you're trying to model. It might be traffic. It might be game mechanics. Balancing your mechanics and things like that. Lots of different things. You can make it probabilistic, and you can see an experimental answer of what would happen if you played this out over time. Stuff like what we asked about what would happen if we changed that damage formula for the Warcraft to be from 50% or 10 to 20 damage instead being 1 to 20 damage. What would it change in terms of the variability of outcomes here? You can model that kind of thing in this program, which is kind of neat. Just a little extra thing if you're curious. So let's talk about markets. Let's talk about trade. The simplest form of trading is bartering, right? So you have resources that you have something that somebody else wants, and they have something that you want. So you trade, right? I will give you my sheep if you give me 2 stacks of bricks. Simple. Okay, sure. Trade a sheep for 2 stacks of bricks. You can also buy and sell services. You can say, oh, if you help me with this quest, I will give you this sword. Okay. In Minecraft, I will tell somebody, hey, if you dig this big hole for me in these dimensions, I need it for reasons. I will give you a diamond. But every time you can trade value, you have a market. It doesn't matter if you have money or not. Uh, this is called bartering. When you're trading items like beaver pelts or something like that, this is bartering. In this system, there is no such thing as money. Money is not required. You don't need money to trade value, right? All of those things that we described, they don't involve money. You just traded value. And everything in the economy does have value. Uh, However, there are some problems with this system because you have very limited trading opportunities. It depends on if you can find a buyer for what you have. So let's imagine a different situation. I have extra sheep that I want to sell. I'm a shepherd. I have many sheep. That's great. I want bricks to build a house. But I keep I keep looking around the village. I cannot find any damn person who wants a sheep but has bricks to give me. Right? There's nobody who wants to give me bricks for my sheep. That's a problem, right? Because I have sheep, I want bricks. Okay, I did find somebody who wants sheep, but they don't have bricks. They have stone. They can give me stone for it. It's like, yeah, so, yeah, no, I don't have bricks. I do have these rocks. Do you want the rocks? I'll take your sheep if you give. I'll take your sheep and I'll give you these rocks. Okay. Then maybe I do find as well somebody who has bricks, but that person who has bricks doesn't want sheep and they don't want rocks either. They want grain. Oh no. So I have this crazy train here where I have sheep, but I need to find something to complete this chain to somehow get bricks, right? And it is currently undetermined if I can even do that because the person who has bricks doesn't want sheep. He has no need for sheep. He wants grain, but nobody's giving me grain. So I don't have a way to complete this trade. I don't have a way to get bricks. There's just no way. Um, until we find somebody who can help complete this chain so that we can Everybody trades the next thing, okay, then it's not going to work, right? I need to keep looking for more people. I need to try to find more people. Or I could take the risky route and try and trade my sheep for some stone, but then I have stone and nothing else, and I don't know what to do with that. And I gotta find someone, hopefully, someone who will trade stone for grain, who will give me grain, and then I can trade for bricks. Ugh, what a pain. Compromise, make a stone house. Fair, true, but maybe that's not what I wanted. Maybe there might be some bad problems with doing that as well. Um, it's not really made specifically for that. Okay, so there's a lot of risk involved now. Even worse, I'm lucky that I have sheep. Because what if I had books? Then even less people would know how to would feel that that is something tradable, because the value of a book is very dependent on who is interested, and if they read the book already or not, you know. Uh, so same with a painting, a piece of art, any piece of art. These are not commodities. Does anyone know what the difference between what it means for something to be a commodity? What does it mean for something to be a commodity? A commodity is something that is relatively uniform and has relatively uniform value. So that can be like a sack of potatoes can be a commodity because one sack of potatoes is roughly equivalent to another sack of potatoes, right? Um, and most people view sacks of potatoes as being relatively equivalent, just in general, right? Um, one bag of grain is roughly equivalent to another bag of grain. There might be some slightly different levels of quality of them, but they're mostly consistent, right? One sheep is mostly consistent with another sheep. Maybe this sheep is more pretty than that other sheep, but they're both sheep, okay? Does not happen the same with paintings. One painting is unique and very different from another painting, and it's not traded so easily. Somebody might value this painting at $10, right? Somebody else might value that painting at $10,000. Completely different. So these are not commodities, right? A painting or a book is not a commodity. The value of them changes a lot. So what if instead of having sheep, I had paintings to sell? That's even harder, right? Because I would need to find somebody who wants my painting who wants to give me bricks. That's even harder to find that specific target market. So what is the solution for this? I've been talking about all these problems. How do we what is something we can do to help with this problem, to solve this problem? Yes, money was invented to solve this problem. If instead we just agree that silver can be traded for all sorts of things that we value silver, we trust silver. If everyone agrees that, then what I can do instead is say, I have sheep, you have bricks, okay? I'm going to sell my sheep to somebody who wants sheep for silver, and then I will sell my silver to you for bricks because I know everybody wants silver. If everybody agrees that they want silver, that they value silver, then I can do this. Okay? So when used in this way, silver becomes a currency, and it doesn't matter what it is. If it's used in this way as the intermediate, right? So we had all these different resources. Here's a sheep. Um, you know, here's a bricks. Here's a grain, right? And then here's a stone. The it doesn't matter what we use as long as what it is a piece of glue that connects all of these. It doesn't have to be gold. It doesn't have to be silver. It doesn't have to be anything we can eat. It doesn't have to be anything that actually really has value to me. Like, I don't need silver to live, right? This stamped piece of metal doesn't really help me in any way, except that it's used to trade for all these other things. That's what gives it value, right? If you have a $5 bill in your hand, $5 Canadian, what can you really do with that piece of paper? You know, not much. You can trade it for other things, but you can't do anything with that piece of paper really in itself, right? The piece of paper itself is not what's important. It's the value and the ability to trade these things, right? We have the nice plastic money now, so yeah, maybe you can burn it. It probably doesn't even burn that well. I don't know. Yeah, you can make origami out of it. But then a $5 bill and a $100 bill are worth exactly the same to you because they can, and a piece of paper are worth exactly the same because you can make origami out of all of them the same way, right? So what matters is that the whatever object it is, whatever thing you're using, is used as this intermediary. It doesn't really matter what it is. Anything can become a currency. So currency allows me to sell my sheep now and then trust in the future that I can find somebody who can give me bricks, right? I don't have to find the chain and whatever. Now, can anyone think of anything else other than coins that can be a currency? Anything that fulfills this role. You can think of it in terms of real life or in terms of a video game. Cryptocurrency, well, that's designed to be a currency. In Fallout, they trade with caps. Yeah, bottle caps. They use bottle caps in the game Fallout. It doesn't really matter what it is. They actually have old pre-war money in Fallout, but they don't trade with those. They trade with bottle caps for some reason. I don't know why. It's actually a terrible idea, but they do. Souls and demon souls and dark souls? I don't believe you can trade those. In Dark Souls, you cannot trade souls. Souls don't perform this function in Dark Souls. Yes, you can buy those things, but you can't sell them back. You can't trade with other people with them. You can't actually use them as a currency. In Dark Souls, souls are a resource, but they are not a currency. They're not used to facilitate trade like this. V-Bucks also aren't used to facilitate trade like this. The game might call it a currency, but it's not actually used really so much like that in this way. Uh, it's kind of just an extra step. V-Bucks may as well not exist. It may as well just be you buying, with your real money, you're just buying items. That's what I would say. It's just your real money. But yeah, I don't know. Okay. Like I said, guys, I when I ask some random player on the server in Minecraft to dig a big hole for me, I might choose to pay them in diamonds. And the reason I choose to pay them in diamonds might be that just I know that everyone values diamonds, right? So there might be an economy where we're just we list prices in terms of diamonds. And if you list prices in terms of diamonds and you say, okay, I'll give you 3 diamonds to do this, this is worth 2 diamonds, something like that, um, then everything is everything is quoted in diamonds. That basically means that diamonds are being used as a currency, right? If you go to prison and you have to deal with the prison economy system, in prison, People don't have a lot of money. What do they have? They have maybe cigarettes. You can trade cigarettes for stuff. I might not even smoke cigarettes myself, but if I'm in prison, I might collect cigarettes to be able to trade them with other people for stuff, right? Or maybe like yeah, some other, I don't know what else people trade in prison, but maybe cigarettes, maybe candy bars, you know. Actually, Halloween's coming. That's another one. If you you could barter candy if you're quoting prices in terms of full size Snicker bars, then maybe that could work. Okay. Uh, Historically, uh, commodities have been used as well as currencies, like bags of grain. Again, even if you're not actually consuming the grain yourself, you can use grain as a currency. You can just say, okay, everybody agrees that we list prices for stuff in bags of grain. Um, so and those are just generally universally useful, so we can trade in bags of grain. In the apocalypse, maybe alcohol is worth a lot. Yeah, maybe bullets. Yeah. Uh, there's an example of a game here. This is a there's a game called Metro, set in a post-apocalyptic Russian subway system. Okay, and uh, above ground there's a whole bunch of horrible radiation and mutant creatures and stuff like that, and weird stuff going on, strange anomalies. Okay, and so everyone lives below ground, and instead of money, the characters in this world, the people, the society that lives underground, they trade in bullets. Specifically, a certain type of bullet. They trade in this specific military grade ammunition, uh, just because one, it there is a lot of it. Two, is useful for most people in terms of self defense because most of the weapons that they have actually are chambered for that round. They will use that bullet specifically. Um, it's a very common bullet, uh, and it's very valuable. Like it's a good bullet compared to other makeshift stuff that they can make underground, and it's hard to counterfeit. It's hard to counterfeit this. It's hard to make a fake ammunition cartridge. You have to be quite skilled to do this in the post-apocalyptic world. And if you do, then you just made a useful piece of ammunition that has just the same utility in self-defense anyway, right? It's hard to mass produce them. So if you do actually make one, then it's at least it should be worth that anyway. So that makes a lot of sense in that world, right? So you actually in the game you collect these bullets, and they are your currency, and you can shoot them out of your guns. You can just basically shoot your money out of your gun. So a resource doesn't have to be issued by a developer or be labeled by a government to be used as a currency. It's a currency when it's used to trade things, basically. When it's used to hold value. There are some problems with currency. We need to be careful about it. If for silver to work as a currency, I need to trust that it has value, and I also need to trust that other people will continue to value it in the future. Because if I'm going to sell my sheep now and hold on to silver, I need to be sure that tomorrow my silver will still be worth something, right? Or next year my silver is still going to be worth something. A good currency is relatively stable, but also with some slight inflation. A good currency actually has very, very slight inflation. So if we're mapping value over time, it actually goes down very slightly. So inflation might be a there might be a target rate for inflation that you want, like 1% or 2% every year. Um, and you don't want it too high and you don't want it too low. So if silver becomes less valuable over time, that is, you know, today 1 silver buys me a Big Mac. Tomorrow, 1 silver buys me half a Big Mac. The value of a silver is decreasing over time. That is inflation, right? It incentivizes, in a way, it actually does incentivize spending. Because if my silver is going to buy me a Big Mac now, and it's not going to buy me a Big Mac tomorrow, maybe I'll buy the Big Mac now. Okay. What about the other situation? Deflation, where my silver becomes more valuable over time. What could go wrong with that? You might imagine that's actually a good thing, but it's not. It's also bad. If silver becomes more valuable over time, that actually is also a problem. Um, it incentivizes hoarding your silver. At either extreme, and by silver I just mean any currency, right? Anything currency. At either extreme, if you have inflation, too much inflation, or too much deflation, both of those lead to a very bad problem where in both cases you will not have enough money to buy something. In inflation, nobody will want silver, so prices will go up. In deflation, nobody wants to give me silver, so I won't have any silver. In both cases, I don't have money to buy my bricks. I don't have money in both situations. So you don't want inflation or deflation. You want very slight amount of inflation, but you don't want too much of either. So let's explain. Why do I say that? Right? It's a strong. It sounds like maybe it's a strong statement to say that inflation is a good thing, but it is, um, because you want to incentivize spending. In your economy, you need to incentivize people to trade with each other, or else it stops moving. One way to incentivize people to actually trade with each other is to make sure that there's no reason that they have to be holding on to all of their money all the time. So, how about this? If my 2 silver can buy 2 sheep today, but it can only buy 1 sheep tomorrow, then I will buy sheep today, right? That is the incentive. If we are in a situation of inflation, I will buy the commodity, I will buy the thing, I will make the trade, right? I'll try to buy the sheep before my money becomes worthless tomorrow. On an extreme level, that's not good, right? But on a controlled level, it very slightly incentivizes you to spend money. If it happens too fast, then we have problems. That's the problem. If it happens too fast, then I can't hold on to wealth, right? Then it makes problems holding on to any value in terms of, my currency, and I don't have faith in that currency anymore. So, in situations of high inflation, you'll see people try to buy commodities, items that will hopefully have more consistent value that is retained to more people. So maybe they will buy gold, even though gold isn't. I guess it's kind of useful for like computers and stuff like that. But people don't need jewelry, so gold is useful in some cases for sure. But you know, it's something we agreed as a benchmark. Same with silver. You know, the the reasons for that are not as strong as the reasons would be for like sheep or grain or like rice or something like that. But gold doesn't have a shelf life, so people like that, right? So if I sell for my silver, then I have silver. Every day I'm holding silver, I will lose value. So I try to buy something that does have value instead, or that won't lose value. That's what happens in an inflation situation. We're learning a little bit of economics, right? That's fun. In a deflation situation, you have another problem. It incentivizes hoarding. So if my 1 silver can buy 1 sheep today, but my 1 silver can also buy 2 sheep tomorrow, then I will not buy sheep today. I will not buy sheep this year. I will wait until I can buy 2,000 sheep with my 1 silver. Great. All right. If this happens, then nobody is going to buy anything. If nobody buys anything, then nobody makes money. Nobody trades value. If nobody buys anything, then I can't, uh, you know, I can't trade, my resources. I can't get the bricks that I need or whatever, right? Um, if nobody buys anything, nobody wants to spend, nobody trades. If people stop trading, you don't have a market anymore because people aren't trading, and this is also a problem because then you don't have people, specialized people, exchanging value for each other, right? People stop interacting with each other basically. They're just waiting. So this is also bad, which is interesting. Plus, if you think about it, um, if your game has a growing population, same with real life. If your game has a growing population, uh, you need to grow the money supply to actually match that population. Because if your money supply doesn't also grow with your population growing, then what you're going to have is less money per person available. So by default, if you have a growth rate of plus 2% players per year, you also need your currency to at least grow by plus 2% in terms of inflation per year. Like you need the supply of the money to go up. Okay, not in terms of, yeah. Well, so we looked at a few different types of economies. There's the bartering system, right? In Settlers of Catan, they use this type of bartering system. You don't have gold coins in Settlers of Catan. You just have your resources, your bricks and your stone and your sheep and stuff like that. You can trade them to build more stuff, or you can win the game. Um, you can build stuff to get more resources, or you can build stuff to win the game. Uh, the game also punishes people for having too much stuff, so it punishes you for hoarding things by forcing you to discard extra stuff. So you have like a maximum number of resources that you can hold on to. This is important. This is a balancing mechanic, right? We talked about feedback loops. We want to make sure that we have some limits, some hard and soft limits. This is a hard limit to how many of one resource you can hoard. It controls the supply. It controls the supply. There's also a bank in the game that always trades at a 4-to-1 ratio for resources. So at no point can someone ridiculously tell you, "Oh, you want 1 stack of bricks? Oh, okay, but you only have sheep, right? Okay, so you're gonna have to give me 20 sheep. You give me 20 sheep, I'll give you 1 stack of bricks. Sound fair? Not at all fair. It's not at all a fair deal. But if I have a monopoly, I'm the only one with the bricks, then I can set whatever price I want, right? The game offers a feature that prevents people from doing that specifically, having that crazy monopoly and setting whatever price they want. It adds competition to the market by having a bank, just like a base trading rate. Um, so at any given time, instead of trading with players, you can also trade with the game, and the game will trade at a 4-to-1 ratio. It's still not a good ratio, but it's better than that 10-to-1 or 20-to-1 that somebody else offered, right? So I could say, uh, I could say, oh yeah, if you want 1 brick, you're gonna have to give me 20 sheep. But then you could also just go to the bank and say, basically, oh yeah, I don't want to take that person's trade. That trade is ridiculous. I will take the base price that you're offering me, and instead I will give you 4 sheep to get 1 brick. Right? So this sets a price ceiling, right? This sets a price ceiling. So you can't make something cost more than 4, or, right? There's a ceiling to the price. If you want, for political reasons, for friendship or something like that, players could still choose to trade at a worse rate if they wanted. I don't know why, but they could. But this is quite elegant because the game doesn't say specifically you're not allowed to do this. The game just says, yeah, you can trade with players, and you can also trade with the game at a 4-to-1 ratio. It doesn't say players aren't allowed to trade more than 5 resources for a thing. It doesn't say that, right? It doesn't say players aren't allowed to charge 4, more than 4 for something, more than 4-to-1 ratio. You don't need rules like that if you just add this. So it's quite elegant that it sets a price ceiling without breaking everything. The government also has certain controls like that where they set, base prices for stuff or ceiling prices for stuff. Can kind of regulate a market a little bit, right? So we have this in the real world as well. There's stuff like the prime lending rate that'll affect the inflation, stuff like that, right? We have controls. Any economy with currency has to deal with these inflation issues for sure. They have to deal with supply, money supply. They have to deal with price regulation. If you're making a game which has currency, then you have to deal with that. Games like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy or whatever, they also have to deal with the problem that players are constantly printing money by killing monsters and getting gold from that. Um, so that's also a problem, and that they're constantly printing money. So it causes inflation. You can also have markets outside of a game itself. Magic the Gathering and other trading card games can feature a market where people trade stuff outside of playing the game. You can trade the game pieces. So you build in this game, you build a deck of cards. Those deck of cards have different effects and different art and stuff like that. Um, and people can trade them and buy them and sell them on a third party market, right? And sometimes people value certain cards more or less. The value of a card, of what people are willing to pay for a card, can depend on sentiments regarding a card. If it won a certain tournament, it has some kind of like historical value to this person. If it has good memories for that person, um, the card's value can change. How much people are willing to pay for it changes based on how powerful it is in the game, if it's banned or not. It can depend on the supply of that card. How many of them are there? How rare is it? It could depend on the art, just how beautiful the artwork looks, because there are some cards with some really beautiful art. Um, and it can also depend on the popularity of certain play styles or certain deck types and things like that. Um, Overall, the publisher controls stuff like the supply, which is very important, the rarity of cards based on how many they print and if they reprint and things like that. They don't actually have control over the trading of the cards. That's the players do that, right? And they don't get any money off the trading of the cards either. They just get money off the initial sale of the cards. They don't. The publisher, doesn't get any more money by taxing players or something like that. No. But it is part of the value of the game. A lot of people enjoy playing the game for the trading aspect as well. A lot of people like the trading. A lot of people like speculating on the future value of a card or of a deck. Some people get pretty crazy with it. They think about like they're making investments, or that they're, like it's like they're investing in stocks or something like that when they're buying cards for their Magic the Gathering deck. Um, and sometimes that's fun for people, actually, right? People enjoy that. There's other video games that have this sort of thing, like economies in Defense of the Ancients, or in Team Fortress 2, or in Counter Strike Go, or whatever. Counter Strike. Okay, and for this, we the controls. A lot of that is based on supply and demand. So there's one more concept I'd like to bring up is supply and demand. When you have supply and demand, it affects value. If you have a lot of something, then the value will generally decrease. But it also depends not only on how much of something you have, it depends as well on how much of something people want, the demand. So there is a point at which supply and demand meet. That is the value of something. That's where you actually find the value of this item. If supply increases but demand does not increase, the value will go down. If supply decreases but demand stays the same, the value will go up. So the situation of, for example, a certain card in Magic the Gathering, that is printed once and never reprinted again, but it's really, people care about it. There's this one card called the Black Lotus that's really powerful. It was printed a long time ago. It's worth like thousands of dollars right now. And it will never be reprinted ever again. The supply is constant. And in fact, the supply might go down. The supply might go down as copies are lost or taken out of the market, right? So the supply might go down, which would cause the value to go up. Meanwhile, demand for it might remain the same or even increase. Okay, guys, I'm going to need us to focus up here. To talk about reviewing everything we discussed so far. All right? This is our last little concept here. I'm going to play a video. We're going to play a video. Hang on a sec. Let me change the screen. All right, we're going to watch this video, and we're going to look, and I want you to be thinking about everything we've discussed so far, everything regarding, the systems, the objects, the behaviors, the relationships. I want you to identify them. I want you to think about, okay, what is an object? What are the properties of those objects? What are the key resources? Where do they come from? Where do they go? Where do you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? I want you to identify feedback loops in the game and think about the dynamics and the decision making that it enables in the game. Okay? So we'll watch this. Trying to explain the rule set of this game. It's kind of a complicated game, but let me know if the audio is good.
Greetings, Commander. Requested information follows. The strategic options in StarCraft 2 are endless, but the fundamental gameplay mechanics are simple. Gather resources, assemble your forces, and defeat your opponents. You will begin each match with a simple base and a limited number of workers. Use workers to gather resources. Resources are needed to expand your base and to train combat units. To overcome your adversaries, it will be necessary to assemble a formidable military force. Developing a strong economy will help you fuel the needs of your growing army. Each race, Terran, Protoss, and Zerg, has access to a variety of units, each with a set of special abilities that will allow it to fill a specific role on the battlefield. For example, the Terran's Vikings are capable of transforming from assault walkers to air superiority fighters, granting them unparalleled mobility. The towering Protoss Colossus excels at traversing steep elevations with ease and devastating opposing ground forces. Zerg infestors may control the minds of their enemies, turning opponents' units against each other. Every unit in StarCraft 2 is completely unique and suited to a specific task. Combining different units to form versatile armies is the key to victory. Victory is achieved when your enemies surrender, or when a lost building is destroyed. As the leader of your army, it will be necessary to think on your feet, to adapt to an ever-changing battlefield, and to use your unit's abilities to turn the tide of battle in your favor. Good luck, Commander, and see you on the battlefield.
Okay, so that gives you an idea of what kind of game this is. So what are some of the key objects in the game? So it mentioned that you start with workers. Was one of those faction bugs? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of bugs. Yeah. You have structures. Yeah, so you have structures as well. Not only ones that you start out with, but you can also build them. Yeah, and you have combat units. So all of these are things you can build for sure. And then there's the terrain. You saw some. We did see some interesting interactions with the terrain. There's like cliffs, high ground and low ground, and stuff like that. Um, the workers are a resource. Yeah, all of the things that you own are a resource. The workers, the structures, the combat units, those are all resource. But you do also gain resources. They mentioned resources. One of the main ones you use is minerals. We're just going to talk about that one. Minerals. So they were mining minerals. Yes. Uh, you can also you can kind of take territory. It's very much an abstract resource because, but you know, if your buildings are on it, it's probably yours, right? You can secure new locations to mine resources from in this game as well. So that's pretty interesting. So this there are many abstract resources as well. Yes, vision, knowledge of the map, knowledge of where your enemy units are, knowledge of what type of strategy they might be doing, a bunch of different things like that, certain information, lots of stuff. There's lots of different relationships and objects because the game has three different races. Yeah, it has three different, you know, types of play styles. Actually, sorry, three different races, and each one has many different types of play styles. A lot of stuff. Yeah. Um, Key resources include your minerals, your dudes, your buildings. Actually, did anyone catch the win condition? You might know this game already. If you do, what is the win condition of the game? It's either when your opponent surrenders the game or you destroy all of their buildings, all of their structures. So the win condition is either they surrender or the last structure on their side is destroyed. It actually doesn't matter how many combat units or workers they have. Um, uh, if technically speaking, if they have a worker, they can build another structure. But if you destroy all of their structures, they lose the game. Um, so that's actually what's interesting is that this is a very important resource because that is the actual win condition of the game. Uh, which also means, you know, at the game you start out with only like one structure. Since you start out the game with only one structure, it is possible to win or lose the game very quickly if that one structure is destroyed. That does happen in the game. It does happen. This is a game that can last 30 minutes or it can last like 2 minutes or like 5 minutes. Um, it is a PvP game, but it also has a single player campaign. Very good, by the way. You should definitely play it. Um, very good game. Okay, so one of the main loops that you have here is your workers can mine minerals. Your workers can also construct buildings that cost minerals. The buildings they can produce can either be tech buildings that unlock new units or production buildings that make more units. So that there are some choices here, right? Uh, Production buildings can, for example, make more workers. You can build a structure that will just make more workers, right? Um, if you have more workers, then what do you have here? A positive feedback loop. We talked about that one already, right? Um, you can also train combat units. Those combat units can be used to attack enemy armies or enemy structures or enemy workers. They can also be used to defend your own. So, through the dynamics of this game, you get some really interesting decisions uh, because it revolves around limited resources, right? You have a certain amount of money. You can decide, should I put my money into building more workers to get more money, to build more workers to get more money, then I will get richer and richer and richer, right? Or should I spend my money making combat units to win the game right now? If I spend my money building myself up and I build a bigger army, then with my bigger army, I might have an easier time, or with more wealth, I might have an easier time building a bigger army, and then I can use my bigger army to crush my opponent. Okay, um, but what happens here if I am spending all of my money building workers? If my opponent sees that I am doing that, they have a couple options. What are those options? Those I mean a couple good options. There's lots of options, but there's only two good things. There's only two smart things to do here if they see that I am growing exponentially with this positive feedback loop. So if my opponent sees me doing this, building more workers, building basically a mining empire, okay, what should they do? They're trying to kill me, right? They're trying to win the game. There's two good things. There's two smart options they could take. Yep, that's it. That's You're exactly correct, Connor. There's the two options are they can build combat units or use whatever combat units they have to attack my poor workers who are quite defenseless because I don't have an army. I only have workers, or I don't have enough. I don't have enough army to defeat their army, right? Um, and so they can cut the head off here to stop me from growing too powerful, right? And make it so that I wasted all of that investment, right? I spent all of that investment building workers and structures, but then they just spent it blowing up my workers and structures, and they got greater value out of that, right? Or the other option is they could see what I'm doing and try and match my growth and hopefully try to outgrow me. That's the other option. They can hopefully see if they can just do it better and then wait until the point where they have overtaken me by a margin great enough for them to actually crush me with their army, trying to get an advantage. So those are the two. Those are some counter strategies, and that's really great, right? You can see that there's a positive feedback loop, but that positive feedback loop of building all of these workers to get more resources and all that stuff, the rich getting richer, it has a downside, which is vulnerability, right? So in your game, you want to build stuff like this, because it is fun to have this positive feedback loop, but it's also fun for that to have a weakness, right? To have some checks and balances, some things that are going to balance that will make it so that it's not just a dominant strategy. Cool. All right, thanks, guys. That's the end of our lecture for now. We talked about systems. We talked about the objects, properties, behaviors, and relationships within them. We talked about resources. We talked about the about trading, about economies, about the dynamics of a game. Um, we talked about positive and negative feedback loops. A lot of great stuff. So now, uh, with whatever time remains, looks like it's only about 12 minutes. Um, but I can stick around for a little longer if you need to. We can do breakout rooms. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll just jump into breakout room number one. You guys can jump into other breakout rooms and chat amongst yourselves. If I do see you in a breakout room, I might come and say hi and see if you'd like to talk to me. Otherwise, it's class dismissed. All right. Any other questions, folks? No. All right. Thank you very much. Take care.